Vyke's tragedy, the first failed Elden Lord. In the vast and unforgiving lands between, countless Tarnished have walked the path toward the Erdtree, each harboring dreams of restoration and lordship. Most fade into obscurity, their names forgotten by history, their ambitions turn to ash in the face of demigods and ancient powers. But there is one whose story stands apart from all others, one whose proximity to greatness makes his fall all the more devastating. His image graces the very cover of Elden Ring itself, a knight kneeling in contemplation, bearing witness to the shattered world around him. This is the tale of Vyke, the Tarnished who came closer than any other to claiming the Elden Throne, only to have everything stripped away by a choice born of love and desperation. To understand Vyke's tragedy, we must first recognize what he represents within the broader narrative of Elden Ring. He is not simply another failed champion relegated to the margins of history. His presence is woven throughout the game, from the armor descriptions that detail his achievements to the two distinct encounters players can have with him. There exists a profound duality to Vyke's character that makes him one of the most fascinating figures in all of FromSoft storytelling. On one hand, we meet Roundtable Knight Vyke, imprisoned within the Lord Contender's Evergaol, high in the mountaintops of giants. This version represents the warrior at his peak, wielding red lightning and the mastery of ancient dragon incantations with devastating precision. On the other hand, we encounter Festering Fingerprint Vyke, an invading dark spirit near the Church of Inhibition, corrupted beyond recognition by the very force he sought to control. These two versions of the same man tell a story of rise and ruin, of potential squandered, of a hero who became a cautionary tale. The armor set that Vyke wore bears testament to his ordeal. The iron helmet is singed and blistered by the burning grip of the three fingers, the metal warped and scarred in ways that no ordinary flame could. The description carved into these items speaks volumes about how close he came to ultimate victory. No other Tarnished was closer to the throne of Elden Lord than Vyke. This singular statement carries immense weight. In a world filled with champions, warriors, and would-be lords, Vyke alone reached the precipice of godhood. He surpassed all rivals. He collected the great runes. He walked the path that the very player character themselves must follow. Yet, without announcement, he traveled far below the capital and was scorched by the flame of frenzy. The question that haunts every item description, every encounter, every whispered legend about this fallen knight is simple yet profound. Did he make his choice for his maiden, or did some other force lure him with suggestion? This question sits at the heart of Vyke's tragedy. It transforms what could have been a straightforward tale of corruption into something far more nuanced and heartbreaking. Was Vyke a victim of manipulation, seduced by promises that seemed to offer salvation? Or was his downfall the result of genuine love, a willingness to sacrifice everything to spare the one person who believed in him from a terrible fate? The game provides clues, but no definitive answer, allowing players to grapple with the ambiguity of his choices. What remains undeniable is that Vyke's story serves as both mirror and warning to the player. Every step the Tarnished takes toward the Erdtree, Vyke took before them. Every demigod they face, every challenge they overcome, Vyke overcame as well. He stood where they stand now, gazed upon the thorns bearing entry to the tree, and discovered the terrible price that lordship demands. The difference between Vyke and the player character is not capability or strength. The difference is the choice made when confronted with that price. The symbolism of Vyke appearing on the game's cover cannot be overstated. In promotional materials for FromSoftware titles, such placements are never arbitrary. The cover of Dark Souls features an armored knight before a bonfire, representing the core loop of death and perseverance. Bloodborne's cover shows a hunter emerging from the darkness, embodying the game's gothic horror aesthetic. Elden Ring's cover depicts Vyke in a posture of contemplation or defeat, his spear planted in the ground, his gaze distant. He is surrounded by ruins and the golden light of grace. Yet something about his bearing suggests resignation rather than triumph. This visual encapsulates the central tension of Elden Ring's narrative. The Tarnished are called back to the lands between to become Elden Lord, but the path to that throne is paved with impossible choices and Pyrrhic victories. Vyke is the embodiment of this tension, the representation of what happens when ambition meets morality, when power demands too high a cost. Understanding who Vyke was before his fall requires us to examine the scattered fragments of his story across item descriptions, boss encounters, and environmental storytelling. Like all Tarnished, Vyke was once among those who lost the guidance of grace and were subsequently exiled from the lands between. When the Greater Will called the Tarnished back following the Shattering, Vyke was among those who answered. He returned to a broken world, one where demigods warred over fragments of the Elden Ring, and the Golden Order had fractured into competing factions. Into this chaos stepped Vyke, a warrior who would prove himself exceptional, even among the exceptional. His journey led him to the Roundtable Hold, that mysterious gathering place that exists both within and outside the normal geography of the lands between. The Hold served as a haven for Tarnished champions, a place where those who sought to become Elden Lord could rest, plan, and receive guidance from the Two Fingers. Within those hallowed halls, Vyke earned the title of Roundtable Knight, a designation that spoke to his prowess and standing among his peers. The Roundtable Hold was home to legendary figures throughout its history, great champions like Vargram the Raging Wolf, errant sorcerer Wilhelm, and Mad Tongue Albric, all passed through its doors. To be recognized as a knight of the Round Table was to join the ranks of these storied warriors. Vyke did more than simply join their number. According to the lore preserved in item descriptions and NPC dialogue, he became known as the knight who came closest to achieving what all Tarnished sought: entry to the Erdtree and the restoration of the Elden Ring. But Vyke's story truly begins not with the Round Table Hold, but with his encounter with an ancient being whose love would define the course of his life. Her name was Lansseax, sister to the mighty Fortisax, and like her brother, she was one of the few ancient dragons who chose to ally with the Golden Order rather than retreat to the crumbling ruins of Farum Azula. Ancient dragons were beings of incredible power and age, their bodies composed of stone imbued with primordial gold, their mastery over lightning, a force that could split mountains and shatter armies. They had ruled the lands between, in an era before the Erdtree, when Dragon Lord Plasudisax sat as Elden Lord, and Farum Azula floated whole in the sky, rather than existing as the crumbling fragments scattered across time itself. When Queen Marika established the Golden Order, most ancient dragons withdrew from the world of men. They had seen their age pass, their lord's god flee, and they retreated to await a return that might never come. But two siblings remained, Fortisax and Lansseax. Fortisax befriended Godwyn the Golden, forming a bond so deep that the dragon would later fight to save Godwyn's soul, even after the Prince of Death had been corrupted by Deathblight. Lansseax made a different choice. She took on human form, assuming the guise of a priestess of the ancient dragon cult in Leyndell. In this form, she walked among the knights and warriors of the capital, sharing the secrets of red lightning and the incantations of her kind. The ancient dragon cult became a significant faction within the capital, proof that worship of the ancient dragons did not conflict with the belief in the Erdtree. After all, both the seal of the cult and lightning itself were imbued with gold, marking them as compatible with the Golden Order's doctrine. It was in this context that Lansseax met Vyke. The exact circumstances of their first meeting are lost to history, but what followed is preserved in the prayers and incantations that bear Vyke's name. Lansseax saw something in this tarnished knight, something that set him apart from the countless other warriors who sought her teachings. Perhaps it was his dedication, his raw potential, or simply an inexplicable connection that transcended the boundaries between a human and a dragon. Whatever the reason, Lansseax shared with Vyke the deepest secrets of the ancient dragon cult. She taught him incantations that allowed him to channel red lightning, the distinctive signature of the ancient dragons. She trained him in their ways, refined his techniques, and elevated him from a skilled warrior to a true master of dragon cult magic. Vyke's aptitude for these teachings proved exceptional. He didn't simply learn what Lansseax taught him, he internalized it, built upon it, and ultimately transcended it. The culmination of his studies was the creation of Vyke's Dragon Bolt, an incantation that bore his own name and served as his signature technique. This prayer summoned red lightning to bolster both his body and his weapon, enchanting his armament with lightning attacks while simultaneously increasing his maximum equipment load. The description notes that this enhanced strength came with a trade-off. Lightning damage negation would be reduced. This was a warrior's incantation, one that prioritized offensive capability over defense, reflecting Vyke's confidence in his abilities and his willingness to embrace risk in the pursuit of victory. The incantation's description concludes with a statement that has reverberated through the community of lore enthusiasts since the game's release. Of all knights, Vyke the Dragonspear was the one Lansseax loved the most. This single line transforms our understanding of the relationship between dragon and warrior. Lansseax, an ancient dragon who had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, who had lived through the age of dragons and adapted to the age of the Erdtree, chose this one tarnished knight as the object of her affection. The nature of this love remains open to interpretation. Was it romantic, as some players theorize? Was it the profound respect of a master for an exceptional student? Was it the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who embodied qualities that Lansseax herself valued? The game provides no definitive answer, but the word choice is deliberate. Lansseax had taught many knights over the years, yet Vyke alone was the one she loved the most. This relationship with Lansseax not only provided Vyke with incredible power, but also established his reputation across the lands between. He became known as Vyke the Dragonspear, a title that evoked both his mastery of lightning-infused combat and his connection to the ancient beings whose power he wielded. The spear he carried became legendary in its own right. Vyke's war spear was a unique weapon, a great spear that combined physical might with the elemental fury of lightning. When players encounter Vyke in his corrupted form as Festering Fingerprint Vyke, this weapon has been tainted by madness, its once pure lightning now mingled with the yellow flame of frenzy. But in its original state, as wielded by the uncorrupted Roundtable Knight Vyke, it represented the pinnacle of his combat philosophy, overwhelming power delivered with precision and backed by the ancient magic of dragons. Armed with this power and driven by the guidance of grace, Vyke embarked on the journey that all Tarnished must undertake, the collection of great runes and the defeat of the demigods who held them. The path to becoming Elden Lord was never meant to be simple. The shattering had divided the Elden Ring into fragments, each claimed by one of Marika's offspring. These demigods represented the most powerful beings in the lands between, each one a force of nature in their own right. Godric the Grafted, though diminished from his lineage's glory, commanded armies from Stormvale Castle and had grafted the limbs of countless Tarnished onto his own body. Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, ruled the Academy of Rhea Lucaria and wielded sorceries that could reshape reality. Radon, the Star Scourge, had grown to titanic proportions and conquered the very stars themselves. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, had fed himself to a god-devouring serpent in pursuit of power. Moog, Lord of Blood, sought to elevate Mikella to godhood and usher in a dynasty of blood. And Morgoth, the Grace-Given, defended the capital against all who would claim lordship. During this journey, Vyke was not alone. Like the player character, he had a finger maiden who guided him, interpreted the wisdom of the two fingers, and provided support throughout his trials. The identity of Vyke's maiden remains one of the game's mysteries, never explicitly revealed in dialogue or item descriptions, but her existence is confirmed, and her fate is central to understanding Vyke's ultimate tragedy. The relationship between a Tarnished and their finger maiden went beyond simple utility. These maidens served as interpreters of divine will, as sources of spiritual guidance, and in many cases, as the closest companions these warriors would have on their lonely paths. Melena's relationship with the player character demonstrates the depth such connections could reach. The maiden believed in the Tarnished, supported them through countless deaths and resurrections, and walked beside them even when the path led to seemingly impossible challenges. Vyke's maiden fulfilled this role for him. She witnessed his rise from an exiled Tarnished to the greatest champion of his age. She celebrated his victories and guided him through his darkest moments. She was there when Lansseax bestowed her teachings, when Vyke developed his signature incantation, when he defeated demigod after demigod and claimed their great runes. Through all of this, she must have come to believe that Vyke would succeed where all others had failed. He had everything required: the strength to overcome any foe, the guidance of grace pointing his way forward, the love and teachings of an ancient dragon, and the will to see his quest through to completion. All that remained was the final approach to the Erdtree itself, the burning of the thorns that barred entry, and the reforging of the Elden Ring. But it was here, at the moment of his greatest triumph, that Vyke discovered the terrible price that lordship demanded. The Erdtree, that great golden tree that anchored all life and death in the lands between, was sealed behind thorns that no amount of strength could penetrate. These thorns were not physical barriers that could be cut or burned by normal means. They were a seal placed by Marika herself, a final defense ensuring that none could enter the tree and claim the Elden Ring without first proving themselves worthy through ultimate sacrifice. To burn these thorns required the flame of ruin, the fire of the giants that had once threatened the Golden Order before being sealed away. Access to this flame required journey to the mountaintops of the giants and the forge of the giants, where the flame was contained. But even reaching the forge was not enough. The flame would not ignite for just anyone. It required kindling, and that kindling was specific. It demanded the sacrifice of a maiden. This was the revelation that shattered everything Vyke had worked toward. All his victories, all his strength, all the power he had accumulated meant nothing if he was unwilling to burn the one person who had believed in him from the start. The game doesn't tell us exactly how Vyke learned this requirement. Perhaps the two fingers revealed it to him, as they would later do through Melina for the player character. Perhaps he discovered it through his own investigation, after failing to pass the thorns through conventional means. However he learned it, the knowledge presented him with an impossible choice. He could sacrifice his maiden, burn her flesh as kindling, and use the flame of ruin to open the path to the Erdtree. This would allow him to enter, reforge the Elden Ring, and become Elden Lord. He would fulfill his quest, restore the Golden Order, and become the champion that the Greater Will had called the Tarnished back to produce. But the price was the death of the one who had walked beside him, who had guided him, who had believed in him. Or he could refuse to sacrifice her, reject the path that the two fingers had laid out, and seek another way. This would mean abandoning everything he had worked toward, turning his back on destiny, and accepting that all his victories had been in vain. For many warriors, the choice might have been straightforward. The maiden existed to serve the Tarnished's ascension. The Greater Will had ordained this path. Becoming Elden Lord would allow him to shape the world, potentially creating an order that would spare countless others from suffering. The utilitarian calculus might suggest that one death to prevent countless suffering was justified. But Vyke couldn't bring himself to do it, whether from love, compassion, or simple unwillingness to treat another person as expendable. He refused to burn his maiden. In this, he demonstrated both his greatest strength and his fatal weakness. He proved that he valued individual lives over abstract goals, that no amount of power was worth the price of murdering someone who trusted him. This moral fortitude is admirable, even noble, but in the brutal logic of Elden Ring's world, where godhood is attained through sacrifice, and strength alone determines worth, Vyke's compassion became his downfall. He stood at the threshold of ultimate victory, and found himself unable to take the final step. Everything he had achieved meant nothing. All the demigods he had defeated, all the great runes he had collected, all the mastery he had attained over dragon cult incantations became irrelevant because he couldn't bring himself to commit to the one act necessary to complete his journey. It was in this moment of desperation, standing before sealed thorns with his goal so close yet impossibly distant, that Vyke became vulnerable to manipulation. And there was someone waiting for precisely this moment of weakness. Someone who had been orchestrating events from the shadows. Someone whose very name had become synonymous with deception and corruption. His name was Shabriri, and he was called the most reviled man in all history. Shabriri's origins stretched back to ancient times, long before the Shattering, perhaps even before the Golden Order itself. He was a man who had committed the crime of slander, speaking falsehoods with such conviction that he deceived entire communities. As punishment for these crimes, his eyes were gouged out, a brutal sentence meant to blind him both physically and metaphorically to the truth he had so casually discarded. But removing Shabriri's eyes did not end his influence. Instead, it opened him to possession by something far worse, the Frenzied Flame, that chaotic outer god that stood in opposition to the greater will and everything the Golden Order represented, found in Shabriri's empty sockets a perfect vessel. The yellow flame of frenzy took root in that hollow space, and Shabriri became not just a worshipper or advocate of the flame, but its very embodiment. He became the first known human to manifest the sickness of the flame of frenzy, the origin point from which this corrupting influence would spread through the lands between. The incantations associated with the frenzied flame all trace their origins back to Shabriri, particularly those that burst forth from the caster's eyes. These prayers are described as having been developed by Shabriri himself, techniques that allowed the yellow flame to manifest through the very organs that had been taken from him. But Shabriri's influence extended beyond merely being a source of power for those who sought the frenzied flame. He possessed an ability that made him uniquely dangerous. He could claim the bodies of others as his own, making them vessels for his consciousness even long after his original physical form had perished. This ability to possess corpses allowed Shabriri's spirit to persist across centuries, influencing events and spreading the frenzied flame's corruption generation after generation. During the events of the game, players can encounter Shabriri inhabiting the body of a bloody finger, Hunter Yura, a warrior who died fighting against the forces of Mohg's dynasty. Shabriri seized this opportunity to claim Yura's corpse and use it to approach the player character, attempting to manipulate them just as he had manipulated Vyke before. The exact circumstances of how Shabriri approached Vyke are not detailed in the game, but we can infer the broad strokes from what happens with the player character. Shabriri himself, as an alternative source of wisdom, someone who understands the Tarnished's predicament and offers a solution that seems to spare their maiden from sacrifice. He speaks of the three fingers, the entity that serves as the frenzied flame's equivalent to the greater will's two fingers. He explains that by seeking out the three fingers deep beneath Leyndell and accepting their embrace, the Tarnished can bypass the need for the Forge of the Giants entirely. Instead of burning their maiden, they can burn themselves, using their own flesh as kindling to set the world aflame. Shabriri frames this as a noble sacrifice, a way to spare an innocent life while still achieving the Tarnished's goals. He appeals to the very compassion that prevents the Tarnished from sacrificing their maiden in the first place. But Shabriri's words are lies wrapped in partial truths. What he doesn't explain is that accepting the Three Fingers' embrace doesn't lead to becoming Elden Lord in any traditional sense. The Frenzied Flame doesn't want to restore the Golden Order or mend the Elden Ring. Its goal is the complete opposite, the destruction of all order, the melting away of all that divides and distinguishes, a return to the primordial chaos that existed before the greater will fractured the one great. Someone who becomes the Lord of Frenzied Flame doesn't rule over the lands between. They destroy it, burning away all life, all thought, all individuality, in a cataclysmic inferno that reduces everything to undifferentiated chaos. This is the true nature of what Shabriri offers, not salvation, but annihilation, dressed up as transcendence. Vyke, desperate for any alternative to burning his maiden, and vulnerable in his moment of crisis, believed Shabriri's lies. He traveled far below the capital, descending into the subterranean shunning grounds beneath Lane Down. These sewers and catacombs represented the underside of the Golden Order's glory, the place where the capital's filth and sins were hidden away from sight. Deeper still, past the forsaken depths, and through the passages that seemed designed to break the spirit of anyone who ventured there, lay the Cathedral of the Forsaken. This structure served as prison and burial ground for a particular group, the nomadic merchants, who had been falsely accused of heresy and buried alive deep beneath the earth. In their suffering and despair, these merchants had called out to something, and that something had answered. They had summoned the Three Fingers, bringing that entity into the world through the sheer intensity of their anguish. The Three Fingers resided in the Frenzied Flame prescription, a chamber at the very bottom of these depths. The entity appeared as a massive hand with three finger-like appendages, burned and smoldering with yellow flame. It was the corporeal agent of the Frenzied Flame, the vessel through which that outer god could interact directly with the physical world. To approach the Three Fingers required a specific ritual. The supplicant had to remove all armor and clothing, standing naked and vulnerable before the entity. This nakedness was both literal and symbolic, representing the casting off of identity, status, and protection. It was a gesture of complete submission, an acknowledgement that the supplicant was willing to be unmade and remade according to the Frenzied Flame's design. Vyke performed this ritual. He stood before the Three Fingers and allowed them to embrace him. The entity's burning appendages wrapped around his body, searing their fingerprints into his flesh with a pain that must have been beyond comprehension. The flames melted into his armor despite it being removed for the ritual, warping and blistering the metal in ways that would mark him forever as one who had been touched by the frenzy. The yellow flame entered through his eyes, just as it had with Shabriri centuries before, replacing normal sight with the burning madness that would consume his mind. In that moment, Vyke was irrevocably changed. The warrior who had been closest to becoming Elden Lord, who had mastered dragon-called incantations and earned the love of an ancient dragon, who had defeated demigods and collected great runes, was transformed into a vessel for chaos. The Frenzied Flame's corruption doesn't happen instantly or uniformly. It begins in the eyes, manifesting as yellow flames that burn eternally in the sockets where normal eyes once were. This flame spreads gradually, working its way through the victim's mind and body, eroding their sense of self and replacing their thoughts with an overwhelming desire to spread frenzy to others. The madness that comes with this corruption is not random or chaotic in nature. It has a purpose: to melt away all that divides and distinguishes, to reduce everything to unity through destruction. Those afflicted with advanced frenzy develop an insatiable need to infect others with their condition, to share the terrible gift they have received. They become evangelists for annihilation, preaching the virtues of chaos to anyone who will listen, while attacking with frenzy-infused incantations to those who resist. For Vyke, this transformation meant the death of everything he had been. All his training, all his achievements, all his relationships became secondary to the overwhelming imperative the Frenzied Flame imposed on him. The dragon cult incantations he had mastered were pushed aside in favor of frenzy spells that burst yellow flame from his eyes. His signature, Vyke's Dragon Bolt, that expression of his unique synthesis of human skill and dragon teachings, became irrelevant compared to incantations like the Flame of Frenzy and Howl of Shabriri. Even his appearance changed dramatically. The armor had once marked him as a knight of the Roundtable Hold became warped and scarred, the metal bearing fingerprint impressions where the 3 fingers had touched him. His weapon, the war spear that had served him so faithfully through countless battles, became tainted with madness, its blade now carrying the ability to inflict frenzy on those it struck. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of Vyke's corruption was that it didn't save his maiden. Shabriri had promised that accepting the Frenzied Flame would spare her from sacrifice, and in a technical sense, this was true. Vyke did not burn her as kindling for the forge of the giants, but the madness that consumed him didn't discriminate. As the frenzy took hold, as Vyke's mind was fractured and his identity dissolved into the flame, he lost the ability to distinguish between those he meant to protect and those he meant to destroy. The maiden who had believed in him, who had guided him through his journey, who he had sought to save through his desperate bargain with the 3 fingers, became just another target for his frenzy-maddened assault. The evidence for her fate lies in the Church of Inhibition, that ruined sanctuary in northern Liurnia, where Vyke's corrupted spirit invades players who approach. Inside the church, sitting on a wooden chair beside the site of grace, is the corpse of a finger maiden. She wears the distinctive garb of her station, the finger maiden set, complete with fillet, robe, and shoes. Her positioning suggests she died in this place, perhaps seeking sanctuary or refuge. The location is significant because it sits near the Frenzied Flame village, an entire community that fell to the same madness that consumed Vyke. When players approach the church, they are invaded by festering Fingerprint Vyke, suggesting a connection between this location and the fallen knight. The most likely interpretation is that this maiden corpse belongs to Vyke's own finger maiden, the one he sought to save, and that in his madness he either killed her directly or drove her to this place where she perished from grief and despair. The community of lore enthusiasts has debated whether Vyke intentionally killed his maiden or whether she took her own life in response to his corruption. Both interpretations find support in the game's environmental storytelling. If Vyke killed her while mad, it represents the ultimate tragedy. His attempt to save her led directly to her death, making his sacrifice meaningless and his corruption complete. If she chose to take her own life, it suggests she chose death over witnessing what Vyke had become, unable to bear the transformation of her champion into a monster. Either way, the outcome is the same. The maiden died, and Vyke's desperate attempt to spare her proved not only futile, but actively harmful. Everything he had sacrificed was for nothing. The authorities of the Golden Order, presumably under Margot's direction, recognized the threat that Vyke posed. A champion who had come so close to becoming Elden Lord, now corrupted by the Frenzied Flame and wandering the lands between, spreading madness, could not be allowed to continue unchecked. Some force, whether Knights of Leyndell or champions specifically tasked with dealing with threats to the Golden Order, managed to capture Vyke and imprison him. But they didn't execute him. Instead, they sealed him within an Evergall, one of those mysterious pocket dimensions that existed outside normal space and time, designed specifically to contain beings too dangerous to kill, but too valuable or too difficult to destroy outright. The Lord Contender's Evergall, in the mountaintops of the Giants, became Vyke's prison, a fitting location given that the mountaintops represented the final approach to the Forge of Giants, where Vyke's original quest had led him to discover the maiden sacrifice requirement. What makes Vyke's imprisonment in the Evergall particularly fascinating is the state in which players find him when they enter the pocket dimension. The Vyke encountered within the Lord Contender's Evergall is not the festering Fingerprint Vyke corrupted by frenzy. Instead, players face Roundtable Knight Vyke, a version of the warrior that appears to predate his corruption. He wields his signature techniques with precision and skill. His combat style demonstrates mastery of dragon cult incantations, channeling red lightning with devastating effect. He fights with the discipline and tactical awareness of a trained knight, not the maddened aggression of one consumed by frenzy. His appearance lacks the obvious corruption that mars Festering Fingerprint Vyke. There are no yellow flames burning in his eyes, no mad cackling of frenzied screaming. This is Vyke as he was before his descent beneath Leyndell. Vyke at the height of his power and skill. The question of why Vyke appears uncorrupted within the Evergaol has prompted extensive speculation within the lore community. One theory suggests that Evergowls exist outside normal time, effectively freezing their occupants at the moment of imprisonment. If Vyke was sealed in the Evergaol before he fully succumbed to the Frenzied Flame's corruption, the version of him trapped there might represent an earlier state, preserved like an insect in amber. Another interpretation proposes that Evergowls somehow strip or suppress certain afflictions, maintaining the prisoner in a purified state. This would explain why several of the powerful beings imprisoned in Evergowls throughout the lands between appear to retain their sanity and combat effectiveness, despite whatever circumstances led to their imprisonment. A third possibility, darker in its implications, is that what players fight in the Evergaol is merely an echo or imprint of Vyke at his peak, a spiritual remnant that maintains its original form, even as the true Vyke suffers corruption elsewhere. Regardless of the metaphysical explanation, the Roundtable Knight Vyke fight serves an important narrative purpose. It allows players to experience what combat against Vyke would have been like before his fall, to face the warrior who came closest to becoming Elden Lord and understanding why he was considered so formidable. His moveset combines physical prowess with dragon cult magic in ways that make the fight challenging even for experienced players. He opens combat by thrusting his war spear forward while calling down red lightning, creating a devastating opening strike that can catch unwary opponents off guard. He uses Vyke's Dragon Bolt to enhance both his physical capabilities and his weapon damage, temporarily becoming a lightning-charged terror on the battlefield. His attacks flow smoothly from physical strikes to incantation casting and back, demonstrating the kind of hybrid combat style that marks truly exceptional warriors in the lands between. When players defeat Roundtable Knight Vyke in the Lord Contender's Evergaol, they receive Vyke's Dragon Bolt as a reward. This legendary incantation becomes available for the player's own use, allowing them to channel the same red lightning techniques that made Vyke famous. The incantation's description provides crucial text about Vyke's relationship with Lansseax and confirms his status as her most beloved student. Claiming this reward feels significant because it represents inheriting a piece of Vyke's legacy, taking up the techniques of the dragon cult as taught by an ancient dragon to her favored knight. For players invested in faith builds and lightning-based combat, Vyke's Dragon Bolt becomes a powerful tool, a constant reminder of the fallen champion whose path they follow. But defeating the version of Vyke trapped in the Evergaol doesn't end his story. There is another encounter waiting for players, one that shows what Vyke became after the Frenzied Flame consumed him completely. In northern Liurnia of the Lakes, past the village that fell to madness and near the Church of Inhibition, where a dead finger maiden sits upon a wooden chair, players can trigger an invasion by Festering Fingerprint Vyke. This dark spirit represents Vyke at his absolute worst, the culmination of his corruption, and the embodiment of everything he lost. The name itself is telling. Festering suggests rot and decay, a wound that has gone septic and spread infection through the entire body. Fingerprint references the marks left by the 3 fingers, those burn scars that mar his armor and flesh. This is Vyke after he has been broken by frenzy, after the madness has had time to work its way through his entire being. The differences between Roundtable Knight Vyke and Festering Fingerprint Vyke could not be more stark. Where the Evergaol version fights with disciplined technique and strategic application of dragon cult magic, the corrupted version attacks with wild aggression and frenzy-infused incantations. Festering Fingerprint Vyke opens combat with the Flame of Frenzy, that signature spell of those corrupted by the Yellow Flame. He unleashes bursts of maddening fire from his eyes, attempting to build up frenzy status in his target. The frenzy status effect is particularly dangerous because when it fully accumulates, it causes massive damage and briefly stuns the victim, leaving them vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Vyke uses this to deadly effect, combining frenzy buildup with physical strikes from his war spear, which itself has been corrupted to inflict madness with each hit. His combat style lacks the refined technique of his uncorrupted self. He attacks with desperate fury rather than calculated precision. He screams and howls as he fights, the sounds of a mind that has been shattered and reassembled into something barely human. His movements, while still dangerous and effective, carry an edge of barely controlled chaos. This is not a trained knight executing practiced techniques. This is a vessel for the Frenzied Flame, using whatever tools remain available to spread madness to others. The red lightning that once defined his fighting style has been largely abandoned in favor of the yellow flame that now consumes him. Where Roundtable Knight Vyke represented the pinnacle of what a Tarnished could achieve through dedication and training, Festering Fingerprint Vyke represents the depths to which even the greatest champion can fall. The location where this invasion occurs adds another layer of tragedy to the encounter. The Church of Inhibition sits on a hillside overlooking the Frenzied Flame village, that settlement where every resident succumbed to madness and now wanders as mindless monsters spewing yellow flame. The village itself tells a story of contagion, of how the frenzied flame spreads from person to person until entire communities are consumed. Standing in the church, looking out over this devastation, while a dead finger maiden sits behind you and Vyke's mad spirit materializes to attack. Players are confronted with the full scope of what the frenzy does. It doesn't just corrupt individuals, it destroys communities, turns friends and families into enemies, and leaves nothing but ash and madness in its wake. Vyke isn't just a fallen hero, he's patient zero for a plague that consumed everyone around him. Defeating Festering Fingerprint Vyke rewards players with Vyke's War Spear, the unique weapon he wielded throughout his journey. Like its owner, the spear has been corrupted by the Frenzied Flame. The weapon deals both physical damage and lightning damage, maintaining some connection to Vyke's Dragon Cult teachings. But its weapon skill has been replaced with something sinister. The spear's weapon art allows the wielder to charge forward while unleashing frenzy from their eyes, building up madness in nearby foes. The description notes that the spear was wielded by Vyke, the knight who almost became Elden Lord, and that he was burned by the flame of frenzy. The weapon serves as physical evidence of Vyke's tragedy, a once noble armament twisted into a tool for spreading madness. The spear's appearance reflects its corrupted nature. The blade shows signs of warping and discoloration, the metal stained by exposure to yellow flame. The shaft is wrapped in cloth that bears fingerprint burn marks, similar to those found on Vyke's armor. When used in combat, the weapon occasionally manifests flickering yellow flames along its length, visible reminders of the corruption that permeates every aspect of Vyke's legacy. For players seeking to use the spear, it occupies an interesting niche as a great spear with split physical and lightning damage, plus the ability to inflict madness. It's a powerful weapon that rewards aggressive play, much like Vyke himself fought. But wielding it means carrying a piece of his tragedy, using a tool that represents everything he lost in his desperate attempt to save his maiden. Beyond these two direct encounters, Vyke's presence echoes throughout other aspects of the game's lore and mechanics. His armor set can be found and collected, allowing players to dress in the same gear he wore. The Fingerprint set, as it's called, consists of helm, armor, gauntlets, and greaves, all marked by the distinctive burn scars left by the three fingers. The descriptions on each of these pieces provide crucial information about Vyke's story, particularly the oft-quoted line about him being closest to the throne of Elden Lord and his journey beneath the capital to accept the yellow flame. Wearing this armor comes with unique benefits and drawbacks. The full set provides resistance to madness and frenzy buildup, presumably because it has already been saturated with the Frenzied Flame's influence. But it also marks the wearer as someone walking the same path as Vyke walked, a visual reminder of his cautionary tale. The Fingerprint Stone Shield, one of the heaviest and most defensive shields in the entire game, also bears Vyke's mark. This colossal door-like shield is covered in fingerprints burned into its surface, and its description explicitly states that Vyke used it before his descent into madness. The shield provides extraordinary defensive capabilities, capable of blocking nearly any attack without breaking the wielder's guard. For dedicated tank builds, it represents one of the best defensive options available. But like Vyke's spear and armor, it carries the weight of his story. Every time a player raises his shield, they're using equipment that belonged to the knight who almost achieved ultimate victory, only to lose everything in pursuit of an alternative path. Vyke's story also connects to other quest lines and characters encountered throughout the game. Shabriri, the ancient deceiver who likely manipulated Vyke into accepting the Frenzied Flame, appears to the player in the body of bloody finger hunter Yura. This encounter occurs late in the game, after Yura has died fighting against Mohg's forces. Shabriri possesses the corpse and attempts to convince the player to seek out the Three Fingers. Using many of the same arguments he presumably used on Vyke. He speaks of sparing Melina from sacrifice, of finding an alternative to burning someone innocent. The player who has discovered Vyke's fate by this point can recognize these words as manipulation, understanding that Shabriri offers not salvation, but damnation. The fact that Shabriri uses identical tactics across potentially centuries demonstrates his consistency in preying upon the compassionate impulses of Tarnished, who balk at the cruel requirements of the path to lordship. The Frenzied Flame, ending itself, serves as demonstration of what would have happened if Vyke had succeeded in his corrupted quest. Players who accept the Three Fingers Embrace and complete their journey by touching the fractured Marika and claiming the Elden Ring, trigger the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending. This conclusion shows the Tarnished standing amid the burning ruins of the Erdtree, having set the entire world aflame. The sky fills with yellow fire as everything melts away, all distinction and order reduced to primal chaos. Melina, if she survived, appears and promises to deliver destined death to the player character, making them her enemy for having chosen this path. This ending represents what Vyke was working toward, consciously or not, when he accepted the Three Fingers Embrace. Its devastation on an apocalyptic scale, the literal end of the world, dressed up as transcendence. Understanding Vyke's story requires examining the theme of choice that runs throughout Elden Ring's narrative. The game constantly presents players with morally complex decisions, where there are no clear right answers. Should you burn Melina as kindling to access the Erdtree, sacrificing someone who trusted you to advance your quest? Should you seek alternatives like the Frenzied Flame, even knowing they lead to worse outcomes? Should you trust the guidance of the Two Fingers and the greater will, or should you forge your own path, even if it means defying the cosmic order? These questions don't have easy answers, and the game respects players enough to allow them to make their own choices and live with the consequences. Vyke faced these same questions and made his choice. He refused to sacrifice his maiden, demonstrating admirable compassion and unwillingness to treat another person as expendable. But that choice left him vulnerable to Shabriri's manipulation, leading him to accept the Frenzied Flame as an alternative. That second choice resulted in catastrophe. His maiden died anyway. He became corrupted by madness, and his quest to become Elden Lord transformed into a mission to destroy everything. The tragedy isn't that Vyke made the wrong choice in refusing to sacrifice his maiden. The tragedy is that the world presented him with a scenario where either choice led to suffering. He could kill his maiden and carry that guilt forever, or he could seek alternatives and fall victim to forces beyond his understanding. There was no good option, no path that allowed him to preserve both his quest and his principles. This moral complexity makes Vyke's story more compelling than a simple tale of corruption. He wasn't weak-willed or easily deceived. He was strong enough to come closer to becoming Elden Lord than any other Tarnished. He had the love of an ancient dragon, mastery of legendary techniques, and victories over multiple demigods to his name. What brought him down wasn't lack of strength or skill. It was compassion, combined with desperation, the desire to find a way forward that didn't require him to become the kind of person who murders innocents for power. Shabriri exploited that compassion, offering false hope that seemed to align with Vyke's values while actually leading him toward annihilation. The question the game leaves unanswered is whether there was any way Vyke could have avoided his fate, or whether the requirements of the path to lordship were specifically designed to break anyone who possessed a functioning conscience. The parallels between Vyke's journey and the player character's journey are impossible to ignore. Both are tarnished, called back to the lands between by the return of grace. Both embark on quests to collect great runes and defeat demigods. Both eventually reach the Erdtree and discover it sealed behind thorns that can only be burned by the flame of ruin. Both learn that accessing this flame requires a maiden sacrifice. Both are approached by Shabriri, offering the Frenzied Flame as an alternative. The main difference is that players have the benefit of hindsight. They can discover Vyke's fate before making their own choices. They can find his corrupted spirit at the Church of Inhibition, fight his imprisoned self in the Lord Contender's Evergown, read the descriptions on his armor and weapons, and piece together what happened to him. This knowledge allows players to make informed decisions where Vyke could not. But the game doesn't judge players who choose the same path Vyke walked. The Frenzied Flame ending is available as a legitimate conclusion to the story, and some players may feel that burning away the entire world is preferable to perpetuating the cycles of suffering that the Golden Order has created. The lore provides arguments for this position. The Greater Will abandoned the lands between, leaving it in chaos. The demigods fought each other in a destructive war that killed countless innocents. The Golden Order's fundamental tenet involved sealing away death itself, creating a world where things that should die persist in twisted mockery of life. Perhaps burning it all away and starting fresh is the only way to escape these cycles. Vyke might not have consciously chosen this philosophy, but players who follow his path might do so deliberately, understanding the implications and accepting them. There is also an interesting mechanical parallel in how the game handles the Frenzied Flame compared to other choices. Most major decisions in Elden Ring can be reversed or avoided through specific actions. Players can complete Ranni's questline, serve the Three Fingers, or pursue various other outcomes, often with paths that branch and rejoin. But accepting the Frenzied Flame locks players into that ending unless they complete Millicent's questline and obtain the Needle of Unalloyed Gold that Miquella created to ward off Outer God influence. This needle, when used at Dragon Lord Placidusax's arena in Farum Azula, can suppress the Frenzied Flame and allow access to other endings. The difficulty of this reversal, requiring completion of an extensive side quest and travel to a hidden boss arena that exists outside normal time, reflects how hard it is to undo the corruption once accepted. Vyke never had access to such a needle, never had the opportunity to reverse his choice. Once he accepted the Three Fingers embrace, his fate was sealed. The relationship between Vyke and Lansseax adds another dimension to his tragedy. The ancient dragon who loved him most watched as he fell from grace. We don't know how Lansseax reacted to Vyke's corruption, whether she tried to save him or was forced to accept his loss. The game provides no direct information about her response to his fate, but players can encounter Lansseax herself in combat, fighting her as a field boss in the Altus Plateau. She uses the same red lightning techniques she taught Vyke, demonstrating the power and grace that made the ancient dragons legendary. Defeating her yields ancient dragon Lansseax's glaive, a prayer that allows the caster to transform into a bolt of red lightning and thrust forward with a dragon's power. It's a technique similar to those Vyke would have learned from her, another connection between dragon and fallen knight. The fact that Lansseax continues to exist in the world while Vyke has fallen to madness creates a poignant contrast. She represents the teachings he embraced, the power he mastered, the relationship that defined his rise to prominence. Encountering her after learning Vyke's story adds emotional weight to what might otherwise be just another dragon fight. This is the ancient dragon who loved the knight closest to becoming Elden Lord. This is the being who shared her deepest secrets with a mortal warrior and watched him transform those teachings into something uniquely his own. And now, that warrior is lost to madness, imprisoned in an Evergaol, or haunting a ruined church as a mad spirit. Whether Lansseax mourns Vyke's fate or is moved beyond such emotions is unknown, but the tragedy remains unchanged. The theme of maiden sacrifice that forms the core of Vyke's downfall connects to broader questions about the Golden Order's nature and the Greater Will's expectations. Why does the path to lordship require killing a maiden? The practical answer is that the flame of ruin needs kindling, and maiden flesh specifically serves this purpose. But the thematic answer goes deeper. The greater will seems to demand proof of commitment, evidence that the aspiring Elden Lord is willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve their goal. This requirement filters out those who would let compassion interfere with the ruthless exercise of power. It ensures that only those willing to become tyrants can claim the throne. This requirement explains why Morgoth, despite being arguably qualified to serve as Elden Lord, never pursues the throne for himself. Morgoth loves the Golden Order and the Erdtree, despite being an omen, one of the accursed beings that the Order persecutes and imprisons. He possesses a great rune, commands armies, and has the strength to defeat other demigods, but he defends the tree rather than entering it, protecting it against all who would claim lordship rather than seeking lordship himself. Perhaps Morgoth understands what claiming the throne would require and refuses to pay that price. Or perhaps, as an omen, he knows he would never be accepted as Elden Lord, even if he completed all the requirements. Either way, his restraint stands in stark contrast to Vyke's ambition, though both ultimately serve the same function, protecting the Erdtree from those who would breach it. The Finger Maidens themselves occupy a tragic role in this system. They are chosen by the two fingers to guide specific Tarnished, bonding with these warriors and supporting them through their quests. They interpret the will of the greater will, provide counsel and magical assistance, and serve as the Tarnished's primary connection to the cosmic order that called them back to the lands between. But their ultimate purpose, the end point of their service, is to die. Every Finger Maiden who successfully guides her Tarnished to the Erdtree must sacrifice herself to open the path forward. This isn't a possibility or a choice. It's the inevitable conclusion built into their purpose from the beginning. They exist to die so that the Tarnished they serve can become Elden Lord. Melina, the mysterious maiden who guides the player character, seems aware of this fate. She offers herself as kindling at the Forge of the Giants, accepting that it is her purpose and her destiny. She frames it as a choice, telling the player that she has decided to serve as kindling to spare them from having to burn. But is it truly a choice if she was created specifically for this purpose? The player can reject her sacrifice by seeking the Frenzied Flame as Vyke did, but this alternative leads to worse outcomes. The game seems to suggest that maiden sacrifice is simply the price of the path to lordship, an inevitable tragedy that cannot be avoided without embracing even greater tragedy. Vyke tried to find a third option and discovered there wasn't one. Every path leads to death and suffering. The only question is whose death and suffering. This brings us to one of the most debated questions in Vyke's story. Did he truly choose the Frenzied Flame to save his maiden? Or was he manipulated into believing that was the choice he was making? The armor description specifically questions his motivation, asking whether he acted for his maiden or whether someone or something lured him in with suggestion. This ambiguity is important because it affects how we understand Vyke's character and his moral culpability. If he genuinely chose the Frenzied Flame, believing it would spare his maiden, then he's a tragic figure whose good intentions led to disaster. He made a mistake born of compassion and desperation, falling victim to Shabriri's lies because he wanted to believe there was a better way. But if he was manipulated through supernatural influence, if Shabriri or the Frenzied Flame itself warped his thoughts and desires, then Vyke's agency becomes questionable. He might have been a puppet, acting out a script written by forces beyond his control. This interpretation would make him less morally responsible for the outcomes, but also less heroic in his defiance of the greater will's cruel requirements. The game provides evidence for both readings. Shabriri's ability to possess corpses and influence the living suggests powerful mental manipulation. The Frenzied Flame's effect on the mind, driving victims to madness and overwhelming their original personalities, indicates that accepting the Three Fingers' embrace destroys free will. But the fact that Vyke apparently traveled into the depths beneath Lane and performed the ritual of approaching the Three Fingers while naked suggests conscious choice and deliberate action. Most likely, the truth combines elements of both interpretations. Vyke made a choice, but it was a choice influenced by manipulation, made under extreme duress, and with incomplete information about the consequences. Shabriri exploited his desperation and his compassion, framing the Frenzied Flame as salvation when it was actually destruction. Vyke wanted to believe there was a way to save his maiden and still achieve his goal. So, he accepted Shabriri's lies. The corruption that followed wasn't something he consciously chose. He didn't decide to become a maddened monster who would kill the very person he sought to save. That outcome was hidden from him, obscured behind the false promises and half-truths. By the time he understood what accepting the Frenzied Flame truly meant, it was too late. The yellow flames had already burned into his eyes. The madness had already begun eating away at his mind, and there was no path back to who he had been. The two versions of Vyke that players encounter represent the before and the after of this transformation. Roundtable Knight Vyke shows us the warrior at his peak, demonstrating the skills and techniques that made him famous. Fighting him provides insight into what kind of combatant could come closest to becoming Elden Lord. What level of mastery over both physical and magical arts would be required to defeat multiple demigods and claim their great runes. He's fast, aggressive, and creative in combining spear strikes with dragon cult lightning. He's the kind of boss fight that can catch experienced players off guard because he doesn't rely on a single gimmick or attack pattern. He adapts, pressures, and punishes mistakes with the competence of a true knight of the Round Table hold. Festering Fingerprint Vyke, by contrast, shows us what became of that competence when filtered through madness. He's still dangerous, perhaps even more immediately lethal due to the frenzy buildup he inflicts, but his fighting style has lost its refinement. He attacks with wild regression rather than measured technique. The red lightning that defined his combat philosophy has been largely replaced by yellow flame that bursts from his eyes. He screams and howls where his previous self fought in focused silence. Mechanically, he represents the same level of threat as many of the game's mid to late game invaders, but narratively, he represents the complete destruction of everything Vyke once was. The two fights, experienced together, tell a story of degradation and loss that needs no dialogue or cutscenes to communicate its message. There is also thematic significance in the fact that players can use Vyke's equipment and techniques. Equipping his armor means walking around with physical evidence of his tragedy burned into the metal. Wielding his spear means striking enemies with a weapon that has been corrupted by the same force that destroyed its original owner. Casting Vyke's Dragon Bolt means channeling red lightning through techniques he developed in collaboration with Lansseax. Using the Flame of Frenzy and other madness incantations means employing the same powers that consumed Vyke's mind. The game allows players to quite literally walk in Vyke's footsteps, using his tools and potentially his choices. This creates a strange form of connection between player character and cautionary tale, blurring the line between observer and participant in Vyke's tragedy. For players pursuing faith builds focused on lightning damage, Vyke becomes an important figure because his legacy provides some of the best incantations and equipment for that playstyle. Vyke's Dragon Bolt is particularly valuable as a self-buff that enhances both damage output and carry capacity. The War Spear, despite its madness buildup, deals solid physical and lightning damage in a weapon class known for good reach and useful running attacks. The Fingerprint Stone Shield becomes essential for tank builds that want to block rather than dodge incoming damage. All of these items work together to create viable character builds, meaning players can effectively cosplay as Vyke, recreating his fighting style and aesthetic while following their own path through the lands between. This adds a layer of player expression to the lore, allowing individuals to honor Vyke's memory by carrying forward his techniques, even as they hopefully avoid his fate. The Lord Contender's Evergaol, where Roundtable Knight Vyke is imprisoned, sits in a location heavy with symbolic weight. The mountaintops of the giants represented the final approach to the forge where the flame of ruin is contained, the very place where maiden sacrifice is required. Vyke's prison exists in this landscape of endings and terrible choices, a permanent reminder of what happens to those who seek alternatives to the path the greater will has ordained. Evergaols themselves are mysterious structures, stone rings built in ancient times to create pocket dimensions for imprisoning beings too dangerous or too valuable to kill. They exist throughout the lands between, containing everything from ancient heroes to monstrous creatures. The fact that Vyke merited his own Evergaol, that he was deemed worthy of this special imprisonment rather than simple execution, speaks to the threat he posed even after capture. but it also raises questions about the nature of what's imprisoned there. Is it truly Vyke's physical body, trapped in a moment of time before his full corruption? Is it his spirit or soul, separated from his corrupted physical form? Is it merely an echo or impression, a recording of Vyke at his peak, preserved for unknown purposes? The game provides no clear answer, leaving players to interpret based on their understanding of how Evergulls function. What remains certain is that fighting this version of Vyke provides a glimpse of the warrior he was before his fall, allowing players to measure themselves against the standard he set. The geographical placement of Vyke's two encounters tells its own story. The Lord Contender's Evergull sits in the frozen wastes of the mountaintops of the giants, a harsh and unforgiving landscape where few living things can survive. It's a place of endings, where the last giants were exterminated and their flame sealed away. The Church of Inhibition, by contrast, sits in the lush green hills of Liurnia, overlooking a village that fell to madness. One location represents Vyke at his peak, preserved in ice and stone. The other represents his corruption, haunting a place of death and frenzy. The distance between these two encounters, both geographically and thematically, mirrors the distance Vyke fell from grace. The Church of Inhibition itself demands closer examination as a location. Churches in Elden Ring typically serve as places of worship or pilgrimage, offering sites of grace where Tarnished can rest and respite from the dangers of the world. But the Church of Inhibition offers no such comfort. Its name suggests restraint or suppression, as though it was built specifically to contain or ward off something dangerous. The building is small and simple, consisting of a single room with a site of grace and the maiden's corpse seated on a chair. The corpse faces toward the back of the church, away from the entrance, as though she died looking at something or waiting for someone. Whether she was hiding from Vyke or waiting for him to return remains ambiguous. Outside the church, the landscape tells the story of the Frenzied Flame's village's fall. Every resident has been transformed into a shambling madman, their eyes burning with yellow flame, their attacks inflicting frenzy buildup on anyone they touch. The buildings stand empty and damaged, windows broken and doors hanging open. There's no indication that anyone tried to flee or fight back effectively. The madness seems to have swept through, suddenly and completely, overwhelming the village's defenses and transforming its entire population simultaneously. Whether Vyke was the source of this outbreak, or merely drawn to the location after it had already fallen, is unclear, but his presence as an invader near the church connects him indelibly to this site of tragedy. When Festering Fingerprint Vyke invades, players are forced into combat while standing in or near the church, with the maiden's corpse as silent witness to the fight. This creates a powerful narrative moment. The maiden Vyke sought to save sits dead mere feet away, while his corrupted spirit attacks the player with the same frenzy-infused madness that likely led to her death. The site of grace, normally a place of safety, offers no protection from the invasion. Players must fight Vyke while standing on holy ground, turning a place meant for rest into a battlefield. The fact that defeating him drops his corrupted war spear means players can claim the weapon, while the maiden who might have mourned its transformation watches with dead eyes. The invasion mechanics also reflect Vyke's fallen state. While invading NPCs like Bloody Finger Okina or Anastasia Tarnished Eater attack with specific tactics and patterns, Festering Fingerprint Vyke employs the aggressive playstyle common to frenzy-afflicted enemies. He rushes the player with little regard for defense, attempting to close distance and unleash flame from his eyes. His war spear thrusts carry the madness buildup that makes frenzy such a dangerous status effect. If players allow their madness meter to fill completely, they take massive damage and become stunned, giving Vyke opportunity for follow-up attacks. The fight becomes a race against the buildup, as much as a test of combat skill. Players must defeat him quickly, or manage their madness meter carefully, mirroring the way Vyke himself must have struggled against the frenzy consuming his mind. The timing of when players can encounter these two versions of Vyke matters to the progression of Elden Ring's story. The Lord Contender's Evergaol becomes accessible relatively late in the game, requiring players to progress through Lane-Dell, defeat Margot, and reach the mountaintops of the giants. By this point in their journey, players have likely defeated multiple demigods, collected several great runes, and begun to understand the terrible requirements of the path to lordship. Encountering Vyke's preserved self at this stage allows for recognition and understanding. Players can look at Roundtable Knight Vyke and see a reflection of their own journey, understanding that they have followed in his footsteps and stand where he once stood. Festering Fingerprint Vyke, however, can be encountered much earlier. Players who explore the area thoroughly can reach the Frenzied Flame village and the Church of Inhibition well before completing Lane-Dell or collecting all the great runes. This means many players might face the corrupted version of Vyke before fighting his uncorrupted self, experiencing his story in reverse chronological order. They meet the monster first, learn his name and his tragedy through item descriptions, and only later discover what he was before his fall. This backwards revelation creates a different emotional arc than experiencing the story chronologically. Instead of watching someone fall from grace, players witness a cautionary tale and then discover the heights from which the fall occurred. This non-linear storytelling is characteristic of FromSoftware's narrative design, where players piece together stories through exploration, item descriptions, and environmental details, rather than following a straightforward chronological presentation. But with Vyke, the reversal of encounter order creates specific thematic resonance. Meeting Festering Fingerprint Vyke first means encountering him simply as another hostile invader, a dangerous enemy to overcome. Learning his story afterwards recontextualizes that earlier fight, transforming it from generic combat into tragedy. Players realize they've already witnessed the end point of Vyke's corruption when they return to fight his imprisoned self, adding weight and melancholy to that second encounter. The connection between Vyke's story and the player's potential choices creates one of Elden Ring's most effective pieces of environmental storytelling. By the time players reach the Forge of the Giants and learn about the maiden sacrifice requirement, many will have already encountered Vyke in one form or another. They'll have read his armor descriptions, fought his corrupted or imprisoned self, and pieced together what happened to him. When Shabriri appears, offering the Frenzied Flame as an alternative to burning Melina, informed players can recognize this as the same manipulation that destroyed Vyke. They have the benefit of hindsight that Vyke lacked. They can see how this choice ends and make informed decisions accordingly. But the game doesn't make this knowledge mandatory. Players can reach the Forge without ever encountering Vyke, without learning his story, without understanding what the Frenzied Flame truly offers. Such players face the same choices Vyke faced, with the same lack of complete information. They must decide whether to burn Melina, seek the Three Fingers, or find some other solution based solely on the information presented by NPCs like Shabriri and Melina herself. This creates two distinct player experiences, those who learn from Vyke's example and those who might repeat his mistakes without knowing they're following an established path to ruin. The question of Torrent adds another layer of speculation to Vyke's story. Melina offers the spirit-calling bell and Torrent the spectral steed to the player character, noting that she and Torrent have an accord. The spectral steed chooses its rider, and it chose the player character, but item descriptions and environmental clues suggest Torrent has had previous riders. The existence of Torrent-related items and the way certain NPCs recognize the steed indicate a history that predates the player's arrival in the lands between. This has led many in the lore community to theorize that Vyke was Torrent's previous rider, the Tarnished who Torrent carried on the path toward the Erdtree before the player character. The evidence for this theory is largely circumstantial, but compelling. Vyke was the Tarnished who came closest to becoming Elden Lord, suggesting he had access to the same resources and support as the player character. Torrent is essential for traveling the vast distances of the lands between efficiently, making it difficult to imagine any Tarnished succeeding as Vyke did without such assistance. The fact that Melina offers Torrent to the player specifically, and that the steed chooses its rider, suggests a pattern where each generation or iteration of Tarnished seeking lordship receives the same support. If Vyke was Torrent's previous rider, his fall and corruption would explain why Torrent needed a new rider, and why Melina takes such interest in the player character's journey. This theory also adds emotional depth to encounters with Vyke. If the spirit-calling bell the player uses once belonged to Vyke, if Torrent carried him across these same landscapes before his corruption, then players are quite literally following in his exact footsteps. Every site of grace Vyke rested at, every path he rode across on Torrent's back, becomes part of a shared journey, separated only by time and ultimate choice. Torrent becomes a link between two Tarnished who walked the same path, and the steed's choice to serve a new rider represents hope that this time the outcome might be different. Whether this theory is accurate or merely appealing speculation, it demonstrates how deeply Vyke's story has resonated with players seeking to understand the full scope of Elden Ring's narrative. The Frenzied Flame itself, the force that corrupted Vyke, deserves examination to understand what exactly he succumbed to. The Frenzied Flame is one of several outer gods that seek influence over the lands between, existing in opposition to the Greater Will's golden order. Where the Greater Will seeks order through hierarchy and division, the Frenzied Flame seeks unity through destruction. Its philosophy, if it can be called that, rests on the idea that all division and distinction creates suffering, life and death, self and other, order and chaos. These divisions are seen as artificial and painful. The solution the Frenzied Flame offers is to melt away all that divides and distinguishes, returning everything to the primordial One Great from which all things emerged. This return to unity requires the complete annihilation of the current world. Every living thing, every structure, every idea and concept must be burned away until only undifferentiated chaos remains. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending demonstrates this philosophy in action, showing the Tarnished standing amid flames that consume the entire world, reducing the lands between to ash and ember. From the perspective of someone mired in suffering, someone who has watched countless people die in the wars following the Shattering, someone who has been forced to make impossible choices between terrible alternatives, this destruction might seem almost merciful. If everything is suffering, and suffering stems from division, then ending division means ending suffering, regardless of the cost. But the Frenzied Flame's promises are lies wrapped in philosophy. Melting away all distinction doesn't end suffering, it ends existence. There's no paradise waiting after the burning, no transcendent unity where consciousness persists in joyful merger with the cosmos. There's only oblivion, the cessation of everything that makes life meaningful. The merchants who were buried alive and called the Frenzied Flame into the world did so from desperation and despair, not from reasoned conviction. They wanted their suffering to end and struck out at a world that had persecuted them, but the flame they summoned offered only universal death as solution. Vyke became a servant of this philosophy without fully understanding what he was accepting. Shabriri's manipulation, focused on sparing the maiden, offered the Frenzied Flame a salvation rather than destruction. The full implications, the total scope of what becoming Lord of Frenzied Flame would entail, were hidden behind false promises. By the time Vyke understood what he had accepted, the corruption had already begun. The yellow flames burned in his eyes, the madness ate away at his thoughts, and his quest to become Elden Lord transformed into a mission to spread frenzy and prepare the world for ultimate burning. Everything he had worked for, everything he had achieved, became twisted toward the opposite of his original goals. The transformation from hero to monster, from savior to destroyer, represents one of the darkest possible falls in Elden Ring's narrative. Godric the Grafted became a monster, but he was always weak and desperate, his descent into grafting an extension of character flaws present from the beginning. Mohg sought to create a blood dynasty, but his goals were selfish and his methods bloody from the start. Rykard fed himself to a serpent in pursuit of blasphemous power, consciously choosing heresy against the Golden Order. These demigods fell to corruption that aligned with their existing character traits or desires. Vyke fell because he tried to be better than the path demanded. He refused to murder an innocent, sought an alternative, and was punished with corruption so complete that he became the very thing he fought against. This makes Vyke's tragedy distinct from other fallen figures in the lands between. He wasn't undone by ambition, pride, or lust for power. He was undone by compassion, by the unwillingness to treat another person as expendable. The game's moral framework, if it has one, seems almost cruel in this regard. The path to lordship requires ruthlessness, the willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone in pursuit of power. Those who balk at this requirement, who let compassion interfere with ambition, become vulnerable to forces that exploit that very compassion. The greater will offers no mercy for those who show mercy to others. Alternative paths like the Frenzied Flame offer false hope that leads to worse outcomes. Vyke found himself trapped between two impossible choices and made the one that seemed, in the moment, to preserve his humanity. That choice destroyed him more completely than simply accepting the maiden's sacrifice ever could have. The community's response to Vyke's story has elevated him from minor boss and invader to one of the game's most discussed and analyzed characters. Lore videos, forum discussions, and fan theories have explored every aspect of his tragedy. Players have debated whether he made the right choice in refusing to sacrifice his maiden. They've analyzed his relationship with Lansseax, questioning whether it was romantic or pedagogical. They've speculated about his identity, with some suggesting he might be connected to others in the game. The fact that he appears on the cover art has only intensified this interest, as players recognize that FromSoftware chose to represent their game with this particular fallen knight, rather than any of the more prominent demigods or champions. The question of whether Vyke could have been saved has sparked extensive discussion. If someone had warned him about Shabriri's manipulation, if he had known that the Frenzied Flame led to destruction rather than salvation, would he have made a different choice? Could he have found a third path, neither burning his maiden nor accepting the Three Fingers embrace? The game provides one possible alternative through Millicent's questline, where players can obtain Miquella's needle. This needle, crafted from unalloyed gold, can suppress the influence of outer gods, including the Frenzied Flame. Using it at Dragon Lord Plisudasax's arena allows players to reverse their acceptance of the Frenzied Flame and pursue other endings. But Vyke lived during the Shattering, before the player character arrived in the lands between. Miquella was already missing, abducted by Mohg to the Mohgwyn Palace. The needle that might have saved Vyke was inaccessible, hidden away in Millicent's questline that wouldn't occur until the player character's journey. Even if Vyke had known such a solution existed, he had no means of obtaining it. This temporal limitation adds another layer to his tragedy. The tools that might have redeemed him, that might have allowed him to reject the Frenzied Flame after realizing his mistake, simply weren't available during his time. He was born into a moment of history that offered only impossible choices, and trapped him in consequences from which there was no escape. The name Lord Contender's Evergaol carries significance in understanding how the Golden Order viewed Vyke. He was a contender for lordship, recognized as having come closer than any other Tarnished to achieving that goal. Even in imprisonment, his title acknowledges his accomplishments and his proximity to ultimate victory. This distinguishes his Evergaol from others scattered throughout the lands between. He wasn't simply a dangerous criminal or corrupted creature to be sealed away. He was someone who almost reached the pinnacle of power before falling, and his imprisonment reflected that distinction. The authorities who sealed him away seemed to have retained some measure of respect for what he had been, even as they recognized the threat of what he had become. The final tragedy of Vyke's story is its incompleteness. We don't know what happened to Lansseax after his fall. We don't know if he had other allies or friends beyond his maiden and the dragon who taught him. We don't know if anyone mourned his imprisonment, or if his name became simply a warning spoken to discourage others from seeking alternatives to the ordained path. We don't know if he retains any awareness in his imprisoned state, if Roundtable Knight Vyke in the Evergaol experiences time or thought, or if he exists in suspended animation. We don't know if Festering Fingerprint Vyke's invasions represent conscious choice or merely automated response, programming burned into a mind that no longer truly exists. These gaps in the narrative create space for speculation and interpretation, but also underscore how thoroughly Vyke has been lost. Even his story is incomplete, fractured like the Elden Ring itself, leaving only fragments for others to piece together. If you found this deep dive into Vyke's tragic story compelling, please consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless more stories hidden within the lands between, waiting to be uncovered and explored. From the mysterious origins of the Nox civilization to the true nature of Marika's ascension to godhood. The lore of Elden Ring offers endless rabbit holes for those willing to delve deep. Join me as we continue to explore these dark and beautiful mysteries together, one tale of tragedy and one triumph at a time. Until next time, may you find your purpose in the lands between, and may you choose wisely when confronted with impossible decisions. The path to lordship is paved with the consequences of those choices, and as Vyke's story teaches us, even the greatest champions can fall when forced to choose between their principles and their destiny.